Hi, I'm Colleen. Welcome back to my channel. If you're like me, I know that you love handmade items, hand-sewn quilts, hand-sewn clothing, just anything that somebody has put time and effort into making for you. I know that you love it. And so I feel the same way. And whenever I see something that was handmade in a thrift store, for example, or an antique shop, I don't see the item itself, I see the hours that go into making it. And so for me, antique textiles or vintage textiles are probably one of my favorite things to look at, to explore, to touch in the store, and then ultimately I love to bring them home with me. For me, it's a piece of history, not because it's valuable particularly, but just because somebody spent time making that thing, many, many hours in a lot of cases, making that thing for someone or for some purpose. So it sort of captures their handwork and their history. So anyway, it just really speaks to me. So today I'm going to show you a project that will help make use of something that is in pretty rough shape, but it will still preserve some of the beauty of it. We're going to use an old quilt. And by old, I mean it's really old and worn out. Really, it's not usable for its intended purpose anymore. It's just far too worn out. But I hate to see it go in the trash. And so I'm going to show you a way to make use of the usable parts and preserve that little bit of history. So what we're going to do today is make a bunting out of pieces of a really damaged quilt. So you can make this for a nursery or for a party or just for decor in your home. I'm actually going to hang it up here in my sewing room. I'm really excited to be able to do it. I bought this quilt 3 or 4 years ago. It was in awful shape, but the price was right. And if you've ever shopped antique quilts, you know they can be really expensive, even when they're not in great condition. I got this one for just $15. But it was rough. It was in really rough shape, shredded to pieces. So not long after I brought it home, I did decide to cut out all of the usable pieces of the motif. Now these used to be full circles, and it was a queen size quilt. And most of the circles, only half of it was usable, if that. I have a few quarter circles that I was able to salvage. And I set them aside. I cut them out with pinking shears and set them aside until I could figure out what to do with them. And the idea for this bunting came to me, so I decided to share that project with you today. Take a look. So what I did quite some time ago is I cut out all of the usable parts of the quilt. So you can see here, I just used my pinking shears and cut around the edge of all of the usable pieces that I could find. I do have a couple of smaller pieces in this, but for the purposes of this project, I'm just using the half circles. So you can see here I have quite a stack of them, and I have some of this cotton twill tape. And what I'm going to do is make a bunting out of it. So the first step is to measure my tape and see how much I have, and to measure these and see how wide they are. I believe they're just over 7.5 inches. Yeah, so they vary between, like this one actually is 9 inches. This one here is 8.5. Yeah, this one is over 9 inches. I had a couple that were like 7 3/4 inches. So I can't be very scientific about it, but I'm going to try my best to figure out how many of these I have, how much tape I have, and how much space I need to leave in between each of them. So I'm going to do some of the math and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've done the math and I figured out that I have 6 yards of this twill tape. I have 14 of these semicircles. Sorry, the lighting's not good. And these 14 semicircles take up 127.5 inches. So 6 yards times 36 inches is 216 inches, minus 127.5 inches for these leaves me with 88.5 inches. So then I decide how much space do I want in between each of my semicircles. If I make it 2 inches, then I need to deduct the 26 inches for the 13 gaps, which are gaps in between each of the semicircles, from that 88.5 inches, which then tells me how much I need to have for the tails on the end. And it's 31 inches on either end, give or take a half an inch. And that gives you enough string left to tie it around a tree or to tack it up in a room or something like that. So we're going to go ahead and start placing our semicircles onto the twill tape. So I'm going to measure from the end 31 inches, and that's where my first semicircle will start. I'll pin that on, and then I'll allow 2 inches in between to pin the next one on, and so on and so forth. So I'll show you that process now. Finally, here's the last one. I'm going to measure 2 inches from the edge of the previous one, stretch that tape out over the top, and pin it in a few places. We can make some adjustments over at the sewing machine, but this will at least make sure we've got our measuring done correctly and we end up roughly even on both ends. So if I've done my math, then this remaining tail should be somewhere around 30 inches. It's just under 30. And my other one is just at 30. So that's about as even as we can make it. So here's what it's going to look like. I don't know if you can see this. We have a whole strip of bunting using these wonderful hand quilted vintage pieces. And when I say this quilt was ruined, it really was. It was absolutely shredded. This is all that's salvageable from a queen size quilt, except for a few additional scraps. And right here, I'll show you, this is what a lot of the scraps had on there. They were just worn straight through. This is okay. This one little piece is okay. But you can see how faded some of the fabrics are. This had obviously been well loved and well used and washed often. And it absolutely was at the end of his life. So I got the whole quilt for, I think, $15 at an antique store, and didn't know what to do with it, but figured I could do something. And the idea for this little bunting came into my head, and I decided why not. So it was really easy to just go along and cut with those pinking shears right around the edges of these pieces and cut them into half circles. And I'll show you some of the other scraps I have. I have some quarter circles. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with those, but I imagine they'll come in handy somewhere along the way for something. But I have, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 of these, and that's it out of a queen size quilt. So it was definitely at the end of its life. But I'm a sucker for antique linens and especially hand stitched items. I just know the amount of work and the love and the care that went into them, and I hate to see them end up in the trash. So this way we can enjoy some of the handwork and still be able to make it into a useful item without having to throw it away or have all the flaws. So now we'll take it over to the sewing machine and we'll stitch it together. So now we're ready to sew the twill tape to the top of the quilt piece. And you can see I've got it all pinned in place here. And I'm just going to try to line up the top of the twill tape with the top of the quilted piece. And I'm going to use a zigzag stitch for this using matching thread. It could be cute if you wanted to do a contrasting thread, but I don't think I want to do that. So I'm just going to stick with it. We'll do a little back stitch And we'll just carefully make our way along for the entire piece. And as we go, you can see how beautiful some of these fabrics are and how nicely made these quilt pieces are. It's a shame that the quilt was so shredded, but we'll just make our way slowly through until we get to the end of our bunting. Now, when I get to the gap in between, I am going to do a back stitch. And then I'm going to skip this middle section. I had thought about continuing the zigzag stitch all along the way, but I think I'm going to skip in between. So I'll lift my presser foot and move to the next one. Line that up, back stitch, and continue my way. This tape is antique tape that I picked up somewhere along the way too, so it's not precise. It kind of is a little narrower in some places and wider in other places, but that's part of the charm, I think, of doing a project like this. I'm going to back stitch at the end and continue on. So I'm going to continue sewing the rest of this, but you can see how nice that's turning out. And I'm going to show you this up close. The polka dots there, oops, stop focusing. Those are all French knots. They're hand embroidered French knots, which makes it even lovelier. So each of the circles on this quilt had all of these little dots hand embroidered on them. This truly was a work of art. Every bit of it hand stitched, hand quilted, from just probably whatever fabrics they had left over from their own sewing projects back in the day. So I'll go ahead and finish sewing this off camera and I'll be right back. Okay, and here we are at the end. So we're gonna just need to go through and clip all those threads for in between our quilt pieces, where we skipped over the 2 inches of tape. It's going to be a little bit of a fiddly piece of the project, but shouldn't take too long. You can see I'm just going to snip in there. These are great little nippers, by the way. They're thread snips, and they're from Wiss. So my good sewing shears are antiques from my mother-in-law, and that's the brand, the Wiss brand. And they are wonderful. Not very many scissors can be sharpened these days. So anything like a Fisker's scissor or something like that, you can't even bother getting them sharpened because the sharpening companies, the knife sharpeners and scissor sharpeners won't do them. But Wiss, they have an authorized sharpener in downtown St. Louis, and I can take my Wiss sewing shears and my Wiss pinking shears there, and they're 50 plus years old probably at this point, and no problem to sharpen them and get them oiled and adjusted, and they're as good as new. So I do like the brand, and if you spot them in a garage sale, buy them and go get them sharpened somewhere, and they will serve you well for a really long time. All right, so I'm going to finish this up, and we'll see how it works. So I just stepped away and I measured my strings and made them even so that the strings on each end are the same length. And now I'm just going to zigzag over the very end of this tape to keep it from unraveling. You can see that it would probably come undone over time. Let me see if I can come a little closer. So it's kind of a loose weave. So I'm just going to zigzag right over the end just to secure it. Since I have my machine set up with the right color thread, I might as well take care of it while I'm here. And I think it's better than folding it over and making a hem, because I think that would be really bulky. So I'm just going to set my needle to go just off the edge of it. and then just go over it a little bit to give it some extra stability there at the end. So it doesn't even really show that much on this twill tape or this whatever it is, but it'll keep it from unraveling. And I can trim off this loose thread right here so you can see there. It doesn't look a whole lot different than it did before I put the zigzag on there, but I know it's not going to unravel. So do the other side. So I happened to think of an idea that might look cute. So you could leave the bunting as it is, but I experimented a little bit with making a small tuck right here and then flattening that down and sewing a little button, which would create a nice detail. So I'm going to show you that. I have decided to do that on mine, but you could absolutely leave it as it is, or shorten the space in between if you wish. I like the 2 inches, but I also feel like we could add some interest to it by putting that little button there. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do there. So I'm just going to sew a small stitch right here using a straight stitch. So I was on zigzag before, but I'm going to use a straight stitch for now, using that same thread I had in there before. I'm going to go right along and go back the other way. Pull that up, cut the thread, and now you can see it's like this, and then we can just flatten this right down and put a small button here. So I'm going to go ahead and sew all 13 of those loops, and then I'll come back and show you about stitching the buttons on. We're going to see if we can make it. We're playing bobbin chicken. I've got 2 loops to sew and barely any thread. Let's see if we make it. One more. Can we do it? Can we do it? Yes. Everybody knows the satisfaction of bobbin chicken. If you can get to the end without having to reload your bobbin, then you're doing really well. Look at that. Almost gone. But I made it. So this is the look we're going for. Just a nice little loop there with a button in the middle. It just gives it some added interest and texture. So I'm going to go ahead and do the next one. I'm going to try and do it without going out of frame here, but basically I'm going to flatten the loop just like this, and I'm going to take my needle and thread up through the back and right in the center of that loop, like that. I've got my thread doubled, and it's the closest match I had in my sewing stash to the purple of these buttons. So, whoops, there we go. So I chose purple. I was thinking about doing maybe a variety of different colors because there's so many different colors in the bunting, but I decided to go with all purple. There's a lot of blue and purple and sort of cooler colors in the bunting, and so to me it just looked nice to have that cool color carried through with the buttons at the top. I had originally had like orange and sort of a maroon color, and I just decided that the purple looked better. You could certainly do every button a different color, but I wanted them to be all about the same size, and so then I was limited to what I had in my stash. I had a lot of yellows I could have used, but I think the purple ended up looking really nice. So these buttons won't take any strain, so you don't need to put a lot of stitches in them, but you know, definitely you want them to be secure to handle going through a wash if needed. So I'll just knot this off and give it one more knot. This is one thing I've been learning recently, and I'm not really good at doing it, but to knot it off, you would just put your needle part way through, take the loose thread and wind it around a few times, and then hold your finger on top of that thread and pull, and it should make a nice neat knot there. Okay, so you can see I have my little buttons and my little, it almost looks like a little bow. And I'm going to go ahead and continue down the bunting with that. So now here we have the finished bunting. I'm just going to come along and show how that looks. We'll go right in on the buttons. And I did end up putting one on each end. I just thought that was a nice touch. So those look dark on camera, but they're actually purple. Purple buttons. See? And so that's the bunting. I love it. I love how it turned out. So I'm looking forward to putting that up here in my sewing room at some point. So there you go, our completed bunting made from salvaged pieces of a quilt. I'm glad you joined me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to join me for future videos, please subscribe. Take care. Have a great day.